Sometimes.
We ask that you be with us this morning as we look at your word, to understand your action among your people and how that would mean to us. We ask that you be with Lauren this morning. Bless him as he brings us this class and what he's prepared. And later today in the message that he's prepared there too. We ask that you be with us as we go into our time of worship for you. We can feel your presence and our worship will be acceptable. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Okay, we've started the book of Numbers. I know you're amazed. It's off to a slow start. Let me show you what I mean. Start thumbing through the book of Numbers and tell me what chapter you find Israel finally being told to move. Keep going, you're not there yet.
No, I can't.
Okay, finally, we get to chapter 10. So the first 10 chapters of the book, almost a third of the book, aren't even dealing with anything as far as activity, everybody going into motion. The first 10 chapters are getting Israel ready to move. And one of the reasons he does that, look at the census count. Now, he has Moses number the men in Israel, everyone who was 20 years old and above, who were battle worthy. So those that were healthy enough to go into battle, starting at age 20 and ending with when they lose their abilities to be effective soldiers. And the number, in chapter 1, verse 46, how many do we come up with total? Okay, 603,550. That's a pretty large number of just 20 years old to, let's say, 60-year-old males. So that's one of the reasons that the general understanding of Israel's population at this point in their history is somewhere between 2 and 5 million people. That's a reasonable estimate based on just that many battle-aged individuals. And that's only 11 tribes. Levite is not counted in this census. She will be counted. Let me see where the total is on Levi. I'm jumping over chapter 2 just for a moment. In chapter 3, you've got the count, and it's down in verse 39. So in Levi, verse 39, you've got 22,000. And again, it's all the males, only this time from a month old and above. They're 22,000. And so that adds to the number or inflates the number of the population of Israel even further. Now, chapter 2 is about God's getting them ready to move. If you're trying to transition, how many grade school teachers, either currently or at some point in your history, are there in here? Anybody teach little kids ever in their lifetime? Elaine, you said yes. Okay, if you've got 3 classes of little ones on the playground, how do you get them back in their seats? Oh, see, you did it back in the old days. I need Tracy Petty here because she's doing it now. And it's a mess. I can tell you just having 60 kids in a school bus is a challenge. I cannot imagine having several classes of kindergartners out doing something and trying to get them to do it in order. Oh, my stars, like herding cats. Now, you're going to try and get 2 to 5 million people traveling in some semblance of order and efficiency. And they haven't had to do that till now. Now, they've left left Egypt, but that was pretty much of a, everybody get up, grab your stuff, and let's go. Now they're going to be RVing for 40 years, Tommy. Only they don't have the RVs, so they got a little more packing up and breaking camp stuff to do. And so God's getting everything settled. And so what you've got, I wish I could share this picture. I started to make a copy of it, but it didn't copy well. What you've got in chapter 2 is God laying out the order for beginning. From the get-go, Israel was supposed to have her encampments organized just like God wants them. So you've got, in the center, you've got the tabernacle. And the tabernacle was supposed to be surrounded by the Levites. To the east, which was the place of honor, if you will, because the tabernacle opened to the east, the Holy of Holies faced the east. To the east, you had 4 tribes. You had Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, just 3 tribes to the east. Sorry about that. Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. And then you've got Dan and Asher and Naphtali to the north, Reuben, Simeon, and Gad to the south. I hope you're taking notes. There'll be a test on this at the end. And to the west, the backside of the tabernacle, you had Ephraim, Manasseh, and Benjamin. That's how. Yes? Not a rabbit. Okay.
Tabernacle. Is there any kind of bizarre correlation between that and Muslims who face east towards Mecca when they pray? Was that just a consistency towards what was perceived as a holy land with all religions? Or?
No. It had to do with the rising of the sun. Okay? That's symbolism, an analogy. But they always did. The temple did the same way. Facing to the east, facing the rising of the sun. Now, the Mecca, it actually depends on where they're located. They may not face east. Not if they're supposed to be bowing toward Mecca. Yes, well, thanks, Bill. There we go, back to the rabbit. That's okay. Now, here's why he's setting it up this way. One is to remind the people God is now going in their midst. Now, you remember back in Exodus, when Moses comes down off of the mountain the first time, what does he find Israel doing? Worshiping a gold calf that Aaron said just hopped out of the fire fully made. Yeah, we believe that one. First thing they do is rebel against God, break the covenant, and God wants to strike them and eradicate them and start over from scratch from Moses. And Moses intercedes, said, don't do this. Think of what it'll do to your name as much as anything. And so God relents because Moses intervenes, and instead he moves his tent outside the camp. So it was symbolic of being separated. In other words, with the camera set up there, God would have moved had Moses move his tent out of the camera shot so that it was away from the people. That symbolized God separating himself from a wicked people so that he didn't destroy them. And again, Moses intervenes and pleads for God to go with them. And he says, okay, I'm going to go with you. And so it's reestablished. Now they're back. They're getting ready to travel into Sinai, into the wilderness. And if everything had gone according to what God instructed them, it would be less than a year's journey and they'd be starting the conquest. We know the rest of the story, but we'll get there. So, why did I start that? Oh, because the tabernacle is now located in the center of the people. And God he's reaffirming that he is again among his people. He's at the center of the encampment. So that from every tent flap, you can look and you could see the pillar of cloud or the pillar of fire, and it would remain there until God tells them to move. It's in the center. Also, it's surrounded by the Levites. Some scholars feel like that's representative of their job to guard the tabernacle from all threats. And so she would be the most protected, the tabernacle would be the most protected by having the armies on all four sides and then the protective guard around the center. The text really doesn't support that. I just mention that because there are many scholars who see that as part of the symbolism. Judah being the first tribe listed to the east in the place of prominence, that's the tribe from which comes the king. And so Judah is repeatedly elevated as a tribe in their importance. And you'll remember that after the northern tribes are carried off, what's the only tribe that survives? Judah. From 722 on, Judah, with the remnants, exiles who escaped from the northern, but as a tribe, Judah is the only tribe that continues to exist all the way up till the New Testament. When you step into the New Testament and Jesus begins his ministry, he's working among the tribe of Judah only. The rest of the tribes, as tribes, have disappeared. They've been lost. So I'm just tying all that back so we understand where we are. He wants them arranged and organized in a certain fashion. Every time they strike camp, They strike camp the same way. They will march in the same order. The tabernacle will be dead center between the beginning 6 tribes and the trailing 6 tribes. And that's going to set the order for this journey. So God's not herding cats. He is doing this very orderly, and he has to get Israel ready for that. So chapter 2, you've got the armies numbered. You've got the establishment of the tribes, both in their marching order and where they will set up shop. Chapter 3, you've got the Levites to serve in the tabernacle. You've got the census of the Levites, which is 22,000. Now, I want to jump to chapter 3, verse 40, because this is kind of an important thing. What was the plague that broke Egypt's back and allowed Israel to leave? What? Okay, the killing of the firstborn, right? The firstborn belonged to God. He rescued Israel's firstborn and spared them and not the Egyptians. So the firstborn take on this this place of I'm trying to think of the right word. It's a place of honor, if you want to do it that way, although God many times will go to the secondborn instead of the firstborn in certain instances. But it's also a reminder that the firstborn of every Israelite household, firstborn male, was it belonged to God. Now, the firstborn of the flocks belonged to God, and what happened to the firstborn of the flocks if they were clean animals? They were sacrificed, right? They were put to death. When it came to the firstborn of the children of Israel, that wasn't how it was going to happen. Instead, God is making a divine trade. Start in verse 40 with me, chapter 3, verse 40. The Lord said to Moses, "Number all the firstborn males of the children of Israel from a month old and above, and take the number of their names. You shall take the Levites for me. I am the Lord, instead of all the firstborn among the children of Israel, and the livestock of the Levites instead of all the firstborn among the livestock of the children of Israel." So Moses numbered all the firstborn among the children of Israel as the Lord commanded him. All the firstborn males, according to the number of names from a month old and above, of those who were numbered of them, were 22,273. Now, go back to verse 39. How many Levites are there? 273 less, right. There's 22,000 Levites. There's 22,273 firstborn. And that seems like a small number. The general consensus is he's actually told to count those that were the firstborn who were born since the Exodus. That would be a more realistic number, especially if we're dealing with the 2 to 5 million population. I'm not going to haggle one way or the other. This is what God says, and I'm going to work with that. So you've got 22,000 taking the place of 22,273. Let's see. Verse 46. And for the redemption of the 273 of the firstborn of the children of Israel, who are more than the number of the Levites, you shall take 5 shekels for each one individually. You shall take them in the currency of the shekel of the sanctuary, the shekel of 20 gerahs. And you shall give the money with which the excess number of them is redeemed to Aaron and his sons. So Moses took the redemption money from those who were over and above, those who were redeemed by the Levites. From the firstborn of the children of Israel, he took the money, 1,365 shekels, according to the shekel of the sanctuary. Moses gave their redemption money to Aaron and his sons, according to the word of the Lord, as the Lord commanded Moses. So you've got this divine exchange now. God says, I own all the firstborn. I purchased them, you could say, by the blood of the Passover, or purchased them by the execution of the Egyptians' firstborn. He said, but in their place are going to serve the Levites. So the Levites are in a place by themselves. They are not part of the army. so to speak. They don't have the duties that the rest of the camp will have. They have very specific duties, and only they are allowed to carry out the duties. Now, how many sons did Aaron have? Well, wait, I'm not to that yet. Okay, so chapter 4, he gets into the breakdown of the leaders of the tribe of Levi. You've got the Kohath. Wait a minute. Eleazar. Nope, that's not it. There we go. You've got Kohath, you've got Gershon, and you've got Merari. And he's going to break it down. Again, he is making order out of what could be chaos. Because you're going to have, well, let's stop for just a moment. The tabernacle, we looked at that in detail way back then when they made it. When God's Spirit rises up, when the pillar of cloud or the pillar of fire rises up, indicating it's time to move, what's the most important thing Israel has to do? What does she have to move above everything else? The sanctuary, because this is the symbol of God's presence. If you don't move this, and if you don't move this right, then wherever you go, you're going to lose that connection with God, symbolically. And so this is the central part of what's going on. So tomorrow, the Spirit's going to rise up, and you're going to have 22,000 Levites go to work tearing down the tabernacle. And when you get to where you're going to have 22,000 Levites. I'm just using the whole number for right now. 22,000 Levites trying to remember where every piece goes. They don't have instructions like we do with the maps and the bungee cords and all that stuff. Oh, thank you, Bambi. Love you. And I represent that. So, do what? I'm not going to get in the... Oh, no, Bill. Go ahead. Oh, okay. You were just egging it on. Oh, yeah.
Imagine that each one had a particular thing that they did.
Exactly. And that's part of what God's doing here. He takes the sons of the three tribes, and he says, this is your baby. So the sons of Kohath, and I'm summarizing this. We can go through and read verse by verse and argue about a word, and sometimes that's necessary. I'm just trying to give you a feel for what's going on, because what he's doing right now is trying to prepare Israel to move, and to move in an efficient, orderly fashion so that there will not be chaos but order. And so he takes the three descendants of Levi here, and he gives them each specific responsibilities. Kohath is the first one named because Kohath's job, that branch of the Levitical tribe, their job was to move the sacred things. No one else was supposed, even the rest of the Levites weren't supposed to be involved in the sacred things. The most sacred thing is what? The Ark of the Covenant that Indiana Jones found. I know. The most sacred thing, but there was also the altar of incense. There was also the altar of burnt offering. There were several pieces of sacred furnishing that were responsible for being moved. Now, this tribe didn't go in and prepare it to be moved. That was actually the job of the priests, Aaron and his descendants. It was their job to go in and properly cover as they were supposed to be covered, to insert the poles for the carrying, to make sure everything was not visible to anyone else's eyes. And once that was prepared, Kohath was to go in, lift the sacred relics, the sacred items, and carry them out of the tabernacle so that the rest of the deconstruction could continue. Yes, sir.
Only the men from 30 to 50 years old could do that.
Yes, I haven't gotten to that part yet, but you're right. It's right there in verse 3. I didn't read that, but 30 to 50. So he's even got the age range on it. So their job Kohath was responsible for removing the sacred articles, furnishings from the tabernacle, so that the rest of it could be disassembled. You get down to Gershon, you've got down in verse 21 and 22, and again, you're right, 30 years old to 50. Their job was to take care of all of the fabric involved in the tabernacle. So all of the curtains that made the walls around the court, the curtains that made the walls of the tent, the roof coverings, the veil, all of the fabric was the responsibility of Gershon and his. And then Merari, I always felt like Merari got the short end of the stick because theirs is always all about the sticks. It was their job to move all of the wood framework. And so, and the fabric would have been extremely heavy as well, but their job was to, once the fabric had been removed and Gershon has got that out of the way, then Merari would come in, she would disassemble all of the framework, and their job was to transport. And it was so specific. Look at verse 27 of chapter 4. It says, Aaron and his sons shall assign all the service of the sons of the Gershonites, all their tasks and all their service. You shall appoint to them all their tasks as their duty. Let's see, down in verse 32, pillars around the court with their sockets, pegs, and cords, with all their furnishings, all their service. And you shall assign to each man by name the items he must carry. So this was a very detailed, very orderly responsibility to be carried out. So when the Spirit of the Lord indicates it's time to move, the first thing they do, you've got the Kohathites who go in and take out the covered holy things that no one else dared come in contact with or look upon. Then you've got the Gershonites going in, taking off all the fabric, and then the sons of Merari stripping down the framework. Now this is on top of making sure their own tents are ready to go. At that point, Israel can move if the tribes are ready, if they've packed all their belongings. But this was the full-time work, and so if God moved every week, that would be a tremendous job. To tear it all down properly, transport it properly, and reconstruct it, because everything about the camp centers around the tabernacle. Its location, its preparation, its being broken down and set back up properly. All of it centers around the tabernacle. Again, going into a lot of detail, trying to make order. Yes, sir. Why did I say a week?
Yeah.
I was just throwing out a number. Tearing it down, setting it up.
How
As far as we know, they did not.
are they going to travel a week without stopping and resting?
Oh, no, that's not what I'm sorry. What I meant was staying in one place for a week and then striking camp and moving on to the next. I wasn't talking about traveling a week. You're right. That would be very difficult. Although.
See, and I'm kind of mixed on that.
Yeah, I didn't mean it that way, because God has them at several key locations as they travel through the wilderness. I'm not sure how long the journeys took from place to place. Doesn't always say.
When the first people started moving, the people in the back, it may be a couple of hours before they start moving.
Yes.
I'm going by traffic, through these red lights,
Yeah, that's a scary thought.
It takes forever for the cars in front of you to start moving, and the light's been green for a minute.
Yes, and it'll turn red before you get to move at all. Yes, I understand that one.
It'd be a massive undertaking.
Oh, yes. That's one of the reasons that, quite honestly, some scholars aren't willing to accept that large a population. And one of the arguments is the logistics of trying to move that many, and also the logistics of trying to supply the needs of that many, which, granted, would be, if it weren't God, it would be almost impossible, surely. But yes, it would have been a lot like the traffic at the stoplight. I think that's a pretty good picture of it, because there's always somebody in the front that thinks they have to drive below the speed limit. No, but they did seem to take general routes. Okay, now, you start, yes, ma'am.
So, in here, you say that, a notation that if you took a straight line from Egypt to the promised land, it should take about 10 days.
Straight line, yes. And that's assuming you didn't stop and break camp, but God didn't do that. He moved them a section at a time. And we're not told every place they stop, but we are told the significant locations that had that correlated with certain events. So as far as a detailed itinerary, not so much. But we do get the high points of the wilderness wandering anyway. So we'll be in Numbers 5 in just a minute.
Just remember, they couldn't go anywhere until they harvested their manna that day. Because they weren't allowed to store any manna except for on Friday, that was Saturday.
Right.
So every day, whether they were doing it or not, they had to harvest their manna or they didn't have anything to eat.
Okay, that's true. That would have slowed down 2 million people. Doug?
Actually, in chapter 33, all the campsites are named. All the
major
places.
locations, yes.
However, you can't find them on the map.
I was going to say we don't know where they were, but exactly. We know the general area, but beyond that, I had a great comment that I don't dare make because I'm sure my wife will hear it. So we won't. So what was I going to say? Oh, chapter 5. Now, first 4 chapters are all about getting everything in order, preparing them to travel, and then you hit chapter 5. Somebody tell me why chapter 5 is where it is in the text. How does that apply to anything he's done so far? And I ask that question because I don't have a great answer for you. No ideas, no theories? The question is, why is chapter 5 where it is in the text? And about all I can come up with is God put it there.
Get ready to, put the law down till.
Well, that's one of the funny things about it. He's already given a lot of the law. I mean, he has delivered it in Exodus. You've got Leviticus. He goes into extensive detail, statute after statute after statute. Numbers seems to take the approach, okay, we finished with that, and now let's get ready to go. And then you've got chapter 5 in here, and you go, wow. And chapter 6, same thing. Maybe they just needed it right there. Again, God put it there. Bill?
Don't yell at me. Did God put it there, or did Moses put it there? Moses is in charge of all this, and the clean and unclean stuff was a big deal.
Yes.
At that point, I mean, yes, God gave him all of this. Could Moses have had a little discretion to say, you know, we're getting ready to talk about setting up this camp, and this unclean thing has always been very important to my God.
Okay, now unclean, yes. What about the next two? Doug? But I agree with that part.
It seems to be a pattern here in Numbers, but also we had a taste of that in Exodus as well.
Yes, we did.
There was this long passage, before, okay, they're sprinkling the blood on the doorposts and stuff, and then he goes into, the yearly celebration of that.
Yeah.
And here in Numbers, in chapter 14, you've got, the 12 spies who come back and 10 with the people report, and so they, they're sentenced to 40 years wandering, and so some of them said, okay, we're going to go invade the land anyway. Moses says, not so. And then the very next chapter, you've got grain offering and all this instruction. So it's just kind of peppered in through
I like that, peppered in through there. And as far as the unclean, I think you're right. Part of it is purifying the camp and maintaining the outward appearance of purity to reinforce the importance of keeping the camp pure on the deeper scale or on the more significant scale. That one, yes. But you get into the confession and restitution, starting in verse 5, about wrongs and how to make those things right, and the offerings. And a lot of the sacrificial instructions back in Leviticus dealt with that. And then you start in verse 11, and you get into a section that is, well, it doesn't fit most modern thinking. How's that? Because in verse 11, the topic takes up what? Somebody tell me what he's talking about. Speak to the children of Israel and say to, verse 12. If, what? It doesn't say spouses. It says wife. That's a focus there. And so the whole story is about whether you're talking about what's going on. In other words, what happens is a wife strays from her husband, goes and lies with another man, and it's not discovered. So they get away with it. Everything's done in secret. Nobody catches them. There's no evidence that will back up an accusation. And she gets back and everything's cool, except the husband begins to have his doubts. Doesn't say why the husband has his doubts, and doesn't say what's legitimate and what's not. But it's all about the wife's unfaithfulness. And this is one of those peppered in there sections that you go, boy, this one's kind of hairy to fit right here. Now, I've got some theories. We'll look at it in a minute, but let's talk about the story, okay?
And you're moving, you've got a lot of activity, the chaos, that there's more opportunity for things to go wrong or people to misbehave, if you will.
I could see that. Okay? It probably would provide you. Chaos does have a habit of providing that. Okay, I could see that. But the onus of the whole topic is on the wife, right? And on the wife's role. Steve?
I'm going to leave that comment to the side.
Okay.
I'm assuming that this is to be done before they travel.
What is to be done before they travel?
The part about the uncleanness and the...
Yes, that definitely.
Okay, well then you asked why this chapter is here, and that's why I was reading, trying to reply to the chapter here. I relate this to what it says, I think it's in Ephesians, maybe? Don't let the sun go down in your anger.
Okay.
He wants things taken care of before you travel.
Yes.
Don't leave, take care of all this stuff before you travel. So, not so that you'll be, clean or cleansed, but so that business is taken care of. You can I won't say there's a holiness in the travel, but
in a sense there is.
It's so that there's nothing lingering as you go on.
Agreed.
Which relates to the don't let the sun go down in your anger. Take care of it before you go to sleep, so you can be fresh and ready the next day. It's not necessarily forgiveness, but clean up your details before you have to go to another place and have more details. Otherwise, it's just going to hang on, linger on. Take care of this.
Okay, I like that. I think that works.
I'm just thinking of an answer to the reason why is it chapter 5? Why is it here and not someplace else?
Okay, it started the way it needs to go. But this is an ongoing statute that will continue, right? Even after they travel, especially when we're talking about the infidelity and we're talking about the wronging of someone else. I agree. I like that answer. I agree.
No idea why it deals with the wife and not the wife.
Well, we've got some theories on that that I think are worth considering. Here's the deal. Let's see. let me just read, starting in 12. If any man's wife goes astray, behaves unfaithfully toward him, and a man lies with her carnally, and it is hidden from the eyes of her husband, it is concealed that she has defiled herself. There was no witness against her, nor was she caught. If the spirit of jealousy comes upon him, and he becomes jealous of his wife who has defiled herself, or if the spirit of jealousy comes upon him and he becomes jealous of his wife, although she has not defiled herself, then the man shall bring his wife to the priest. He shall bring the offering required and gives you the offering. And then God takes this procedure to establish innocence or guilt. Now, how does that fit in today's modern climate? I mean, that just lays right over today's modern climate, right? Why in the world is he doing this? Well, here's one reason. A wife was considered the what of her husband? Property. If you have property, Roger, you've got, well, I hate to use that. Yeah, well, you've got a three-legged, blind, deaf dog. You can't get me in that one. He knows better. She knows better. You've got a blind, three-legged, blind, deaf dog that's developed cancer and is, he's taking his last breaths. Work with me here, would you? Yeah, was his name Lucky? You're right. What would you have the right, even though the animal people would say you don't, what would you have the right to do? Put it down, right? You've got the right to do that because it is your property. In the ancient world, husbands had almost that kind of right, to the point that it was not unheard of for a woman to be accused of adultery. And true or false, he put her to death in a fit of rage. One of the things this does is it offers clear protection against that excess. The husband had no right, even though the wife was in some sense under his authority, the husband had no right, according to God, to execute his wrath upon her. He could only take it to the priest. Now that actually limits the danger many wives in that day literally had. And so the husband could not execute that wrath, and he could not determine her guilt all by himself. He had a responsibility to take her to the priest. The priest, his responsibility was to present the case before God, because after the event and everything's said and done and there's no witnesses, and how are you going to establish that? He said, she said kind of thing. And God says, we're not going to go that route. We're going to do it carefully. Now, the process is one of those processes that, let's face it, scholars have a field day coming up with suggestions. Why does God give her bitter water? And what does that? It's not a magic ritual. And some would say it is. Look at the process. Verse 17. The priest shall bring, verse 16 says, the priest shall bring her near, set her before the Lord. The priest shall take holy water in an earthen vessel, take some of the dust that is on the floor of the tabernacle, and put it into the water. Then the priest shall stand the woman before the Lord, uncover the woman's head, pour the offering for remembering in her hands, which is a grain of jealousy. The priest shall have his hand in the bitter water that brings a curse. Can't explain it. Read what it says. The priest shall put her under oath, say to the woman, okay, if no man has lain with you, if you've not gone astray to uncleanness while under your husband's authority, be free from this bitter water that brings a curse. But if you've gone astray while under your husband's authority, if you have defiled yourself and some man other than your husband has lain with you, then the priest shall put the woman under the oath of the curse. He shall say to the woman, the Lord make you a curse and an oath among your people, when the Lord makes your thigh rot and your belly swell. That's a wonderful expression. And may this water that causes a curse go into your belly and make your belly swell and your thigh rot. And basically, God says, and that's the way it'll happen. Now, what does it mean, belly swell and thigh rot? Most likely, the most likely explanation is if she's conceived from this sinful interaction, she'll lose the baby. If she hasn't, or in the future, she will be rendered infertile, which was considered cursed from God. But God is removing that from the husband's prerogative and from the priest's prerogative. The one that does the judging is God himself. Now, why is it important? Because Israel's identity was to be maintained, not just as a nation, but within the tribes. And so it was very important that you kept your heritage, your genealogy pure. If you had interaction that produced a baby that crossed the households or the tribes or something like that, now you've polluted or corrupted your inheritance line, and the border between tribes has been blurred. And the woman, because she is the one who may or may not conceive, she's the means by which that cross-tribal child will be born. Did I say that carefully enough? I hope. And that's very likely part of what's going on here. Steve, you were talking about getting your house in order before you begin this journey. That works for all of this. It tells you what to do if you're on the way and you've got a problem with somebody else that's wronged you. And it tells you what to do before you get started. It tells you what to do with the defiled people, those who are leprous or have other things that require them to be alienated from the community. They're supposed to be alienated all the way out. Tommy, they're the ones who have to follow at a far distance behind the camp. So you think everybody else is going to have trouble getting through the light. Those poor people that are outside the camp, they're going to be waiting forever. And the emphasis on keeping their tribal lines pure. For instance, if you had a man from Levi interact with a wife from Judah, whose descendant would the baby be? Would it? Or not? You see, that makes everything very blurry. And the Levites were required to keep themselves pure because they're operating in close proximity to God's presence, which puts them at greater risk, and they have to maintain their purity. They didn't dare take that risk. That was essential because we're getting everything prepared for travel. Okay, yes, sir?
You just kind of hit a nerve about why this is so important, keeping the tribes pure. If this wasn't there, then it nullifies the prophecy that Christ will come from the tribe of Judah.
Yes, sir.
And the genealogy in Matthew.
Yes, it does.
It nullifies both of those.
And ultimately, that is the most important point,
And,
right?
and the heritage of Jesus could be questioned as to whether he really was from David.
Yes, we could.
Just remember though that Jesus' genealogy has Rahab and Ruth.
Yes, but it doesn't have,
I understand.
there's no question we're still in Judah's lineage.
I know that any counted for the male side. I don't know if it's counted for the female side. Just something to ponder.
Yeah, depends on Luke. Lawrence?
My way of thinking, some of the things you're saying is illogical.
Okay.
These were great groups of people. This woman is in her own family group. She's not going to travel some distance to have sex with a man in another group. she's gonna have sex, it's gonna be somebody in her surroundings.
Maybe. That's where you get caught. Again, I'm not, this is our best, because God doesn't come in here and say, this is why, and this is, as far as I can tell, those are the most logical reasons behind it. But again, I'm not saying that's scripture. Russ?
Well, I don't know if you read it last week, I literally just read it, where the tribes, a couple, 3 tribes went to Moses and said, okay, the women are marrying over in that tribe, and we're getting confused about who has what, and it's about their inheritance.
Yes.
And as Moses said, oh yeah, that's right, and comes up with this, let's try to keep it within the tribe. And
Yeah.
but he says, let the women choose who they want to marry. And they do that, and everything's worked out, but it seemed to be a friction between the tribes. So, I don't know about this whole purity thing. As David pointed out, Rahab, Ruth, sin is in there everywhere, but it all tracks back through, all the way back to Judah. I take it more that there was a friction as to who gets what in the family, and this was their solution.
Yeah, just sit back
Yes,
there.
it is part of the inheritance issue, but it is also. Yes, but he still wants them in the same tribe. Yes. The inheritance.